Thanks very much for being here. Thanks for being in the second day of our workshop. Today we are going to be talking about innovation in longitudinal data. My name is Rafael Novella. I'm a senior research fellow at Closer, University College London, and this is a joint workshop with Kat Porter from Lancaster and Gina Crivello from Young Life at Oxford. Before starting today's session, I just want to give you a bit of an overview of what Closer is, and so I'm going to be sharing a bit of my very short presentation. So yeah, Closer is a research project between UCL. It's a research center within UCL that has the aim of maximizing the use, value, and impact of longitudinal studies, improve our knowledge on key social and biomedical challenges. Closer mainly works in 4 areas: in data harmonization and linkage. We also host a super important tool, which is called Closer Discovery, that is a tool for searching and browsing questionnaires and data from 19 UK leading longitudinal studies. And also there are many facilities for training and capacity building. So please have a look to our website. You can find it there. And within Closer, we have this project called Closer International. Closer International, we basically have 3 main areas. One is doing research using longitudinal data in developing countries. We also have put together this tool, which is called Atlas. And Atlas is a repository of data in longitudinal data in developing countries. We already have around 340 studies around the developing world, and this is a tool still in progress. So please have a look at it. If you have any comment or suggestions, please get in contact with us. I really recommend you to visit the website and where you can find different dimensions and different studies in different countries. So that could be a first good step for starting your research and to get to know what data is already there. The third main product of Closer International is building a network of researchers and policymakers interested in collecting and analyzing longitudinal data in developing countries. So again, if you want to be involved in this network, please get in contact with me. And here you can find my email. And I hope, I'm sure that it's going to be shared with the rest of the documentation of this workshop. So now I'm gonna just go through the whole session of today. So as I mentioned, today's session is about innovation in longitudinal studies. Particularly, the session will focus on different ways on how longitudinal data can be linked and work together with other data sources, for instance, administrative records, experimental data, to better understand individuals' behaviors and for contributing to the better design of policies. Today we have 4 great speakers. We have Yyannu Cruz from the Inter-American Development Bank, Paul Glewee from University of Minnesota, Juan Leon from Grade in Peru, and Zanuso from the French Development Agency, AFD. Our 4 speakers will discuss about the opportunities and challenges of collecting and analyzing longitudinal data in projects related to education, infrastructure, and in experimental settings. And the 4th talk has a bit of a focus on Latin America and Africa. Each presenter will have 15 minutes for presentation. I will let you know when you have 2 minutes left in your presentation. And to all the attendees, please bear in mind that we will have a Q&A session at the end of the last presentation, and we should be finishing by 3:30 UK time. Again, to all attendees, please use the chat function at the bottom of your screen for sharing your ideas, comments, and where are you from. This is going to be monitored by one of our teams, and we will get back to your questions at the end of the session. Well, without taking much more of the time, I will start presenting our first speaker. Our first speaker is Yyannu Cruz. Yyannu is a senior economist in the labor market division at the Inter-American Development Bank. She's a specialist in impact assessment and of social and labor market programs. She has published on the effectiveness of social programs and early childhood development, among other topics. Yyannu is currently collaborating on development of loan instruments for many countries in Latin America and the Caribbean. She holds a PhD from the University of Maryland, College Park in the US. So Yyannu, you have 15 minutes for presentation. Thanks very much.
Okay, thank you very much, Rafael and team, for the invitation. It's great to be here, and it's great to be in this panel with all these amazing researchers. Great, so the project that I'm gonna discuss today, it would take a long time to go through all the details, but let me just give you a kind of a story of how we started with this. We at the Inter-American Development Bank get calls from different ministers of different secretaries of education, for example, in this case. And we got a call from the Minister of Education more than 10 years ago, about 11, 12 years ago. And she said, well, the thing is that we are selecting our teachers in a different way. And we think that we are doing a much better job in selecting our teachers. And we want to know if we are getting the best teachers, and we want to know what's the impact of these teachers with respect to all the other things that we're putting in the schools. So we decided to with the ministry and her team and the Inter-American Development Bank, start this project. And the project is called Closing Gaps. Closing Gaps, basically the background is that primary education, access to primary education now I have to say was not an issue before COVID-19. Right now we are in this situation, we are not sure. We're gonna have to reassess. But back in the day, 11 years ago in Ecuador and the rest of the Latin American countries, coverage of primary education, which we are thinking between pre-K and 7th grade, it was not a concern. It was more about the quality of the education that the children were receiving. Several studies by that time had already advised everybody and had convinced us, it was a good evidence that the most important aspect, the most important element for outcomes in schools was teachers. So we wanted to know what about these teachers was actually important here. The thing is that it was not an easy task, since we had to establish a causal effect. And the problem here is that randomizing children to their teachers is tricky, not only for the parents, but for schools, for the principals, and even for the Ministry of Education. So it was a hard task, but we finally got to do that with a lot of support from the ministry, a lot of talk with the unions of the teachers, etc. So what we did is that we took approximately 200 schools that were randomly selected in what we call the Costa regime in Ecuador. Ecuador has two different academic years, one that starts in September and one that starts in February. So we took the one in February, and we took the schools, 200 schools that had at least two groups of pre-K. So this was a sample that was created from a universe of schools that had at least two pre-K classes. So that implies that we got to work with 20,000 students and around 2,500 teachers. And this was done at the school level. The study has been compiling information for about 9 years, and I'll give you some details. And from that 9 years, we have a balanced panel that is a number of children that have been along the entire study, all the years of the study, and those are 9,000 children. We have collected vast information from these children who were 5-year-olds when we started the study, their families, their teachers, and their communities. We have merged the information from the study with administrative information from the country, especially from the Ministry of Education and from the institution that evaluates teachers and students, which is different than the Ministry of Education. And from those merges, we have had things like attendance, dropouts, teachers' experience, and other promotions, salaries, grades of other schools in the country, etc. So we have access, thanks to the collaboration with the Ministry of Education and the other agencies, other ministries at Ecuador. We have been able to add a lot of information, a lot of administrative information that they had and we don't have. So a little bit about the randomization process. It's pretty basic. At the beginning of every year, we just give children a 1 to n number, and then we randomize them between teachers. So if you have 2 teachers, we just randomize the children to 1 teacher, 2 teachers, teacher A, teacher B, teacher. So that's pretty much it. It's a very basic randomization process. This is saying the same thing. So in terms of the data collection, what we did at the very beginning is that we took a baseline cognitive test, and this was a verbal test. It's called the Peabody test. Probably some of you know it. It's about language, and it's pretty predictive of learning outcomes. And we just wanted to check where the children were and if we had balance. So from the first year, which was pre-K, it says first EGB, that just means pre-K. And then 7 EGB just means that the last year of primary education. So we randomly assign those students to their classrooms every single year of the study. We observed the interactions of the teachers with the students using an observation instrument that measures the quality of their interactions. The instrument is CLASS. There's other instruments that could be used, but we went with CLASS because we thought that it was very important to measure interactions. On the things that we collected from the children, we collected development in math, in language, and executive function skills using tests that we developed, but that were based on tests like the Woodcock-Wilson test, and tests like that. Every time that we had to work on this test every year, we would get in touch with experts in each of these fields, in each of math, language, and executive functions. So we're sure that what we were measuring was using an instrument that was appropriate. We also measured behavioral issues observed by the teacher and by the headmaster. We measure interactions between the children. We measure also who were friends, who the children were friends with each other. This was not observed by the teacher. We were asking the children who's your best friend, etc. So we collected a lot of information that was self-reported, but also was directly measured from the children. We also collected an instrument that is called a tripod, and this instrument is basically the perceptions of the children and the quality of the education that they're getting. It also gives the perception of the teachers on how the teachers are doing, and also gets the perception of the parents. So it's called a tripod. We also collected teachers' characteristics. And in terms of teachers' characteristics, we got the basic experience, the basic education of the teacher. If they have been in different schools, in different systems, they have the preferences. We also collected personality tests. Like, for example, the Big Five, the personality test, we collected that. We also collected levels of socioeconomic status from the household of the teachers. And another long list of tests, including also executive function, because we wanted to, for example, make a link between the executive function of the teacher and the students. In the first year and the last year of these children's primary school, we also collected information on the social demographic variables of the household of these children. And we collected non-cognitive information, such as measures of depression, growth mindset, and the same depression and growth mindset for the mothers and the fathers of the children. Also, and very importantly, to keep this panel, we collected information on where could we find them in the future. So we got their addresses, we got their phone numbers, we got the addresses and phone numbers of people that they knew, the people in the same neighborhood, the teachers, their etc. So we could have further participation and contact with them. Okay, so let me go. So we have, I think this is a very small fund, but I'm going to tell you, we have a bunch of different results. What we found in the first year of the study is that the teachers' behaviors do affect the impact on children's learning. And when we say behaviors here, we're talking about the interaction, the quality of the interactions of the teacher with the students, measured by the instrument that I just told you that's called class. We also found that a year of good teacher reduces the cognitive gap between students with mothers who have completed primary school and who have completed secondary school by half. So that's a big proportion. That means that having a good teacher is equivalent to improving the education level of the mother. We also look at how stable were the teachers' behaviors and how impactful were different teachers' behaviors. And we found that a good teacher improves learning in all areas, which means in math, language, and cognitive function. And it improves learning for all students in the classroom. So it's not only the students that are doing worse than others, it's for everybody. And then we also found out that the effect of good practices lasts over time, and I can use from teacher to teacher. I see Rafa there, so I think I have 2 minutes. So this is what we have. We also just have a paper, a recent research about mentoring program that we did for teachers based on the results of this project, showing that the interactions of the teachers with the students are very important when the children are younger, and they fade when the children are older. We have right now, I believe, 3 different articles that are there. We have submitted a bunch of different other articles. We're working, since we have a lot of information from all these children, we could have much more. I mean, we need more hands and minds on this. The other thing, and what we're gonna do now that we are experiencing this COVID, is that we are going to study losses in learning using the children of this group as benchmarks for the children who were suffering from COVID-19. So the idea with this project is to keep on following these children, although we cannot keep on randomizing them because they are now in high school, but to keep on following them and see how their characteristics and their teachers' characteristics when they were younger are gonna play in the future, in the medium and long term. So that's pretty much it. I think, the policy implications, well, there's many. We can talk about them in the questions if you want.
Thanks very much, Yyannu. Yeah, I think I know very well the Ecuador project, and it's fascinating from a knowledge point of view and also from policy implications. So I hope that we can discuss a bit more about that later on in the Q&A session. Thanks very much for the presentation. So our second speaker is Paul Glewee. Paul is professor of economics at the Department of Applied Economics at the University of Minnesota in the US. His research is on household and individual behavior and welfare in developing countries. He has particularly do research on school enrollment and attendance and skill acquisition and learning. He has extensively published in top development journals. Paul has conducted research in many countries in Africa, Asia, and Latin America, and the Caribbean. So, Paul, if you can please share your screen. Thanks very much for being with us today.
Okay, thanks very much, Rafael. Let me get my screen here. So this presentation is going to be a little different from the one you saw before and the ones that are coming, I think. I'm not presenting a particular study. Instead, it's sort of just a presentation on the benefits of longitudinal data when conducting a randomized controlled trial. So let me just go ahead and get into it since there's not a lot of time here. Well, I think you're all familiar with randomized controlled trials, or RCTs. We're using them for assessing program impacts in developing countries, but also developed countries for many different kinds of programs. I mostly do education, but there are many other things. And the very simplest RCT, you don't need any panel at all. Panel data at all. You just need some data that are collected after the program's been in place long enough to have an effect. And so in some ways that might be an appeal. If collecting panel data is difficult, then you could say, okay, you don't have to do that. You can just randomize, and if the randomization goes well, you know, whatever your outcome variables are in education, it's usually the scores of children on tests. You can compare the treatment group and the control group, and then that will give you, if everything's going correctly, that will give you the impact of the program. On the other hand, there are benefits of collecting panel data, and so what I'm doing in this presentation is going to go over what I see as the main benefits, and I've divided them into 4 different types of benefits. And so you can see at the bottom of the screen here the 4 bullets. So the first one is you can use panel data check for threats to identification to see whether you have a problem with the implementation of the RCT, and also how to fix the problem, use the panel data to fix the problem. Second, you can increase the efficiency of your estimates in terms of both statistical efficiency, smaller standard errors of your estimates, and also you could actually save money. I'll explain that later. And then sometimes the collection of baseline data is very useful for improving the quality of the data that collected at the end of the program, endline data or post-program data. And the final sort of general category is that you can do more sophisticated analysis of what's happening with these program impacts. So let me get started here. So checking for threats to identification. I think a lot of you have already done RCTs, and probably almost all of you have read papers based on RCTs. And I think you probably all know that lots of things can go wrong. 2 problems, maybe the most common problems, are lack of balance between your treatment groups and the control group. In other words, a random assignment is supposed to make them all the same, but actually maybe they're not going to be all the same for random or maybe non-random reasons. And the second problem is sample attrition. When you come back to collect the baseline data, not everyone is there. Some people are missing. Okay, so having panel data, and then more specifically, having baseline data in addition to your endline data, can be used to check for these problems and also to fix the problems. So let's talk about the first one, lack of balance between the control group and treatment groups. In theory, if you've got a big enough sample size, the random assignment of the people or the communities or whatever, the firms, random assignment to the control group and the treatment groups should lead to all these groups being very similar, okay? But that's sort of, as the sample size gets very large, and you may find that just by chance, they're not exactly the same. In fact, I was just reading a paper yesterday where they were saying, oh, we did this, and it turned out that there were more women than men in our control group or something like that. And so the first benefit, and if the lack of balance is something that the program can change, then it's harder to check if you just look at your end-line data, because you could say, oh, well, maybe it was balanced at baseline, but the program changed that, okay? Well, it's not going to change boys and girls versus girls or something, but there could be some other things you want to check. In particular, you want to check that your outcome variable should be the same at baseline, and you can't really check that with just the end-line data, okay? So collecting the baseline data allows you to check whether that you really have balance, and then the good news is that if you do have lack of balance or imbalance in some variables, the standard way to fix that up is just to put those variables into the regression equation, and that should control for this, okay? So that's the first benefit in terms of kind of making sure you've got an RCT that's working correctly. And the second one is the problem of sample attrition. Almost always when you collect data, you implement a program and then you wait a while to see if it's working, then you collect the end-line data. Not everyone who was there at the beginning is still there. There's some attrition, and the attrition could vary between the treatment group and the control group. For example, if it's a very nice program, people stay in it, and so the attrition is low, but in the control group, where they're not getting the program, the attrition may be higher. And it could be that you just can't find the people when you go back to collect the data, or maybe they refuse to participate, especially if they're in the control group and they know they're in the control group. So then that's a problem, because if your attrition is not random, which could likely be the case, then you're not going to have consistent estimates of the impact of the program, okay? So if you collect baseline data, that allows you to actually calculate the attrition rates and see whether the attrition is the same rate in the treatment and control groups, and also whether the attrition is random or not. Because you could even have the same rate of attrition, but it could be that the people who are dropping out are not the same in the treatment and control groups, okay? For example, it may be that in the treatment group, if the program is really not working well for some people, that the people for whom the program is the least effective drop out of your treatment group. And so that wouldn't happen in the control group. So even if the rate of attrition is the same, it's not going to be a balanced sample, because the kind of composition has changed. Okay. The good news, though, is that there are ways to fix or at least control for attrition if it does seem to be non-random. There's a method called lead bounds that is used quite often. But to implement that method, you need to have some baseline data, because you need to calculate the attrition rates and some other information to implement it. Okay, so that was the first sort of general, just to back up. That was, using panel data, especially baseline data, to check for threats to the actual identification or the estimation. A second general one is to increase efficiency. Basically statistical efficiency, but also maybe saving money in data collection, okay? So this has to do with actually whether there's the outcome variables that you're looking at are correlated over time. Now, the research I do, which is on education, they're usually highly correlated. In other words, students who score well on a test at baseline are also likely to score well on a test at endline. So there's high correlation in the outcome variable from baseline to endline, okay? Now, the point here is that if you collect panel data, if you have endline data and baseline data, your estimate you can control for using a difference in differences estimation. You can basically use that information at baseline to get a more precise estimate of the impact of program. So what I've shown here at the bottom of this screen is two different ways. So that the first SE stands for standard error, is if you just have endline data only, in other words, not panel data, the root of that, the thing in there is your standard error of your estimated treatment effect, where beta hat is the treatment effect. And you want to have that as small as possible. Obviously, if the sample size, the little n goes up, you're going to have a more precise estimate, smaller standard error. But then if you compare that formula to the one below it, you'll see that if you have n-line data, there's an extra term under the square root sign, which is 2 times 1 minus the correlation coefficient. The correlation coefficient is the correlation of your outcome variable at baseline and end line. And basically what this means is that if that correlation, the Greek letter rho, is greater than 0.5, then your standard error will be smaller for the second formula where you have panel data baseline and end line than if you just collect end line data. So if you have high correlation, you can get higher statistical efficiency by collecting both baseline and end line data. On the other hand, if you don't have very high correlation, what this formula tells you is that it's actually, you'll get higher, more precision if you don't collect the, if you just collect the end line data. But there are other reasons, which I'm going through in this talk about collecting that. But anyways, if you have highly correlated outcome variables, then you should collect baseline data and use the sort of the difference in differences estimation. There's a nice paper by David McKenzie that goes over all this stuff in great detail, but I'm just showing you one thing from that. Okay. And the other thing is, you know, in terms of budgetary efficiency, well, if you find that, yeah, it's a good idea to collect the end line data, I mean, to get baseline and end line, then for a given level of statistical precision, you can actually have a smaller sample size and maybe save yourself some money. So that's the budgetary efficiency side. Okay. Another benefit is of having baseline data, or more generally panel data, is that it'll give you some control variables that you can use to increase the precision of your estimates. Lots of times, well, the simplest regression to run is just running the outcome variable on a variable for, you know, are you in the treatment group or the control group? And if you've got, you know, end line and baseline data, another variable for whether it's the end line data or baseline data, and then in the interaction of those two. And the interaction term is your estimate. But you can actually, maybe, depending on the situation, by adding some other variables to this regression, you can increase the precision, okay? Now, some variables, you could measure them at end line, you know, like the age of people, that's not going to be changed by the program, but other ones could be changed by the program, in which case you really can't use them to increase precision. But if you measure them at baseline before the program starts, then they're completely valid to put them in the regression. And so it gives you some more control variables, which may increase the precision of the estimation. So collecting baseline data may give you some better control variables to use. Okay, and finally, there are some outcome variables that are very noisy, and so it may be a good idea to collect multiple rounds of end-line data, not just one end-line data, but for example, studies of firms in developing countries, and here again, David McKenzie and Chris Woodruff and other people look at this stuff. They find it's very noisy, so they actually interview the people several times and ask them about the income. And if the noise is not correlated over time very much, then they get a more precise estimate. So collecting multiple rounds of end-line data can reduce the noise in your outcome variable and then increase the precision of your estimates. Okay, so that was the second general thing. The third general benefit, and this is much less technical, is it can improve your end-line data collection. So I think there's two ways of thinking about this, or two ways that this happens. One, we can just call it learning by doing. If you've ever collected data, and you probably know that the very first time you go out and collect data, there are some things that didn't go very well and so forth. So the quality of the data that you collect will increase with the experience or the rounds of data collection. So collecting the baseline data can have many advantages, but one just sort of general advantage is that you learn how to collect data. You may learn that your questionnaires or your other instruments could be improved, and the whole data collection system maybe could be improved. And so this allows you to increase the quality of the data. So you kind of revise your questionnaires and the other things and your whole sort of system of data collection. So the end line will have better quality than the baseline. So I call that learning by doing. Another one, I'm not sure how people are familiar with this, but researchers, especially economists and others, have been increasingly using what's called a pre-analysis plan, where they specify ahead of time what they're going to do, what variables they're going to look at, what regressions they're going to run, and even what variables they're going to put in those regressions. And I've done this a few times myself. Now it's relatively new, and it's actually a lot of work. And sometimes it's hard to write the plan. You don't really know a lot of things about your data when you write these pre-analysis plans, and so you kind of sometimes you overlook something that you could have done. And pre-analysis plans, there are different times when you could do it. You could write it before you collect any data. But I think most people would agree that it's also okay to write it after collecting the baseline data, but before the end line data. And so by collecting the baseline data and looking at it, you might be able to see some things in your data that are going to allow you to write a better pre-analysis plan. Because these pre-analysis plans, once you kind of write them down, you're not supposed to do other things that are not in your plan, okay? And if you might leave something out that could be very interesting, okay? So that's another one. So the last two things I'm going to talk about are the way that panel data improves the sort of your RCT is that you can actually do some more sophisticated estimates, okay? The first thing is looking at heterogeneity and impacts, the idea here that the program doesn't affect everybody equally. It affects some people more than others. And there may be some variables that you can collect only at baseline that will be of interest. In particular, the outcome variable you're looking at. I do a research on education, and we want to see whether or not the program, this education program that we're looking at, does it help the best students or the worst performing students and so forth? But we really don't know at the end line. If we just collect end line data, we're not sure, which ones were the best or worst before the program came along. So we really need to collect data at baseline to do that. So this allows you to do collecting the baseline data allows for some interesting heterogeneity analysis that you wouldn't be able to do without the baseline data. And then the second one is that, again, kind of collecting multiple rounds after the program is put in place or after the program is finished to see whether the effects that you find fade out or they continue on. So you could collect data, like 3 rounds of data after the program has ended, one immediately after to see what it did. Hopefully it did something. And then maybe 1 to 2 years later, and then maybe 3 to 5 years later. In fact, the outcomes you might measure could change in these different rounds after the end of the program. For example, for an education program, you'd kind of look at the test scores of kids when they're in school, see if their test scores are still high. And then finally, when they become adults and work, whether or not these benefits in their learning and test scores and how far they went to school show up in the wage or income data when they're working age. Okay, and then the very last thing you can do to kind of do more interesting analysis is look at as the program is operating, how quickly the effects come or what the speed are that the effects are generated. For example, you could measure both in the middle of the program, your outcome variable, and at the end of the program. Because some programs, the length of time that you're so-called treating people is a little bit not clear how long you should treat, okay? For example, the example I gave here is that sort of an ECD or early childhood development program where they're coaching mothers on how to, care for their children's health and education. They may think, well, how many months of coaching do we need? So maybe we have a 4-month program or something, and we can collect data after 2 months and collect data after 4 months. And if you measure the skills or the knowledge of the women, you may find that after 2 months, most of the benefits have happened. So maybe it doesn't have to be a 4-month program. Okay, so that's kind of running through that a little quickly. So that's it for my presentation. Thanks for your attention. And I look forward to your questions later on. Okay.
Thanks very much, Paul. Yeah, it was a very interesting discussion of the many different aspects of combining longitudinal data and RCTs, and I have some questions about. We can go back to them later on. And one is, which is really like striving me at the moment, like is how expensive it is to collect data, longitudinal data in developing settings. So one option is combining RCTs with administrative records, for instance. But we can discuss this later on if you think it's a good idea. Thanks very much for your presentation.
Okay, you're welcome. I look forward to talking to you.
Thank you. So our next speaker is Juan Leon. Juan is a senior researcher at Glewee in Lima, Peru. His research focuses on inequality in education, intercultural bilingual education, early childhood testing policies, and school effectiveness. He has extensively published in top field journals using longitudinal and school level data from different developing countries. Juan holds a PhD in educational theory and policy and comparative and international education from Penn State University in the US. Juan, you have 15 minutes, and
okay.
Thank you very much.
Okay, thank you. Thank you for the presentation. Thank you for the invitation to this panel. I hope you are interested in this paper that we did with Gabriela, Santiago, and Paul. So I will put the presentation first. Okay, the paper that I will present today is a paper that we worked like 2 years ago with Gabriela, Santiago, and Paul. This is a paper that try to understand what makes a school effective, but mainly like secondary schools. Why secondary schools? Because most of the study, at least in Latin American countries, especially in Peru, are focused mainly in primary education. So we need to put also attention to this level, because these children are in line to go to the labor market or also to continue to higher education. So for the reason, it's important to see what factors in the school could promote like better learning for the students, mainly in context of children from poor context. For that reason, this is in some way the motivation of the study. The framework for this research is the school effectiveness. So there is different framework, but we use as conceptual framework the model that is stated by Kremers and Kirikiades in 2008, if I am not making a mistake. They try to show in some way to open the box. The majority of the economists, they try to see like you have an output, you have input, you have an output, and you try to see what is the connection between them. But within this relationship, there is a box, and we don't so much open that box to try to see what are the different relationships that in some way Yyannu will show us what the teachers make in the school. So in some way, what we want to do with this paper is to put the light with about what the teachers and the school principals do in the schools. So in terms of school effectiveness research, as I was telling you, there is like not so much studies in Latin America, and in Peru, I could understand with my hand. So in terms of Latin America, one of the first study was Glewee. Glewee and colleagues, they did a study in 2003, if I'm not making a mistake. Yes. They try to see with a qualitative design what factors make a school effective. Those schools that go or that they have on average students from poor context, but they have results above the average. So in this way, they identify like two factors, at the teacher and at the school level. In terms of the teacher or the classroom level, they found that the teacher practices are very important in terms to have better learning for the students. So practices like teacher feedback or time on task are important to increase the learning of the students. In terms of the school level, they found that there is like two main type of variable, like variables related with a school, with a school principal leadership, the pedagogical leadership that he could developed in the school, but also the school climate. So these two are like the main factors that increase the learning for the students. And then we have other studies in Colombia and Argentina that they found similar results than this seminal work developed by Belay and colleagues. In Peru, if we have to say like what are the main studies that talk about the school effectiveness, like what factors in the schools make a school effective in terms of getting better results in terms of educational outcomes. We have one of the first paper is the paper developed by Cueto and colleagues in 2003. They did a study in 2 regions in Peru, and they found that 2 variables in some way, or it was a quantitative analysis. They found that 2 variables are the most important are more associated with better results for the students in cognitive and socio-emotional outcomes. And they found feedback that the teacher gives to the students, and they found some of the classroom climate are very important to improve the children outcomes in terms of achievement. Then we have in 2006, the Ministry of Education, they developed a qualitative study where they went to 5 public schools in Lima, in metropolitan Lima, and they tried to explore how is the dynamic within the schools and see what are the main factors that explain the results of the children in those schools that they identify with in poor context, but with good results in achievement. And they found that again, the teacher plays a key role, but also in some way the school principals plays a role for improving the educational results of the students. So in this way, these 2 studies like give the seminal work to try to talk about school effectiveness in Peru, but both of them, they talk mainly about primary education. And we know that primary level is different than secondary level, because at primary level you have one teacher, in the majority of the schools, one teacher, mostly in public schools, one teacher that give or that teach to the student the different areas. In the case of the secondary school, you have one teacher per area. So how is the dynamics there? So for that reason, we decided to explore how are the factors, or what are the factors, which factors are associated with these good results for the students. So all this review of the literature and also this conceptual framework bring out with this research question. First is which variables related with the school processes influence student achievement in reading and math. And the other is in case of identify effective schools, what is the importance that the principal and the teachers play in explaining these educational outcomes. So to answer this research question, we decided to use a mixed method design. So we have a sequential design where first we did a quantitative analysis, and second we did a qualitative analysis. So the quantitative analysis gives us some insights about what are the factors that are associated with the educational outcomes. But the quantitative analysis only gives us like, okay, here you have a relationship. But if you want to understand better what means that relationship, in this way, the qualitative study helps us to improve our knowledge about how it's working that relationship, what they are doing within the schools, the vice principal, the principal, and also the teachers to improve this learning for the students. So for that reason, we decided to use this approach. So in the first phase, we decided to use the school survey, the second school survey from the John Lives study, that is a longitudinal study. I think so you already, well, no, it's like the John Lives is a longitudinal study that follows children since 2002 until now. No? Then we are like in the round 6, we collected round 6 last year. So we have different rounds, but we decide, since they try to follow how is the life of these children, they also face not only, they are not only one space, they are not only at home, they are also in the school. So we need to have information about these two spaces. So for the reason, we have two different school surveys in Peru. One when they are at primary level, that was in 2011, and the second one when they are at secondary level in 2017. So we are using the data from 2017 to explain when the children are, most of them, they are in 4th year of high school. But we have children that they are in 3rd year and also in 5th year of high school. So the data for the quantitative analysis, I was telling you, is the secondary school survey, is at secondary level. We have children in 3rd, 4th, and 5th year of high school. We have around like 3,000 students. We went to 61 schools. The methodology, since we want to talk about like students who are grouped in schools, so we need to take into account that there are some covariation of the students that are sharing some space that is the school. So for that reason, we decided to use a random effect model that led us to split in some way the random error of the non-observed term. So we could have a variation across individuals and a variation across schools. And in this way, we could estimate better the standard errors for each of the variables. So in terms of quantitative analysis, the findings are not surprising in some way, because we were waiting this kind of results. That there are, for me, there is like two main results. First is that teacher matters. The second one is that what the school principal does in the school matters too. So in some way we have the teacher practices in terms of teacher feedback, and also the relationship that they have, the teacher, how satisfied they feel with all the environment in the school, not only with their colleague, not only with the student, but also with the school principal, in some way help to have better results in this exercise. A third result that is also interesting is the result about the socioeconomic status, because we found that the average socioeconomic status have an effect on student achievement. So it means that the socioeconomic status not only hit the students at the individual level, but also it hit the students at the school level. So it means that we have a problem with segregated schools. Those schools that are more segregated with children from poor context, they have worse results for children that they are it's more diverse, or they are like segregated, but with children with high socioeconomic status. So we need to check those schools. We need to check what are the input that we are giving to the children, and what are the teachers that we are giving to the children in some way, because what what we found here is that teachers matter, and also the school principal matters. So then we want to see to check the qualitative view about these results. So what we did is, since we found these results about like the teacher matter, the school principal matter, so we decided to go more in deep about this, the relationship within the schools, but also what the school principal does in the school in some way. So for that reason, we selected 2 schools in Metropolitan Lima, in a peripheral district in Lima, that is Ate. We selected the schools that they have a high concentration of poor children or from low socioeconomic status, but they perform over the average in terms of reading and math. So in this way, we have those schools that they are doing well, besides the background of the students. So it means that there is something that they are doing within the school that make the difference for these children. So what we did in these schools is we did in-depth interviews, and also we did focus group with the children, deep interviews with the teachers and the principal or vice principal, focus group with the children. We tried to, or we did like focus group with children that are like high, oh, I saw Rafael, so it means that I am running out of time, yeah. So we did this focus group with children with low achievement and high achievement. So in this way, we could have both point of view. So at the bottom of this slide, you can see the characteristics of the school. So in some way, it reflects what I was telling before, that these are poor context. In terms of the findings, what I like more in qualitative study is the quotes say everything about what we want to say. For example, in the last quote that are at the bottom of this slide, in some way it shows us that more than a strong school discipline, it means that there is a school principal, they teach the students responsibilities in the school. So they need to know that there is norms, and they need to know that they need to follow these norms in order to have an adequate climate in the school. So for that reason, it's very interesting the finding that we have in this aspect. The other is the role of the teacher plays in the school. So we have these two quotes from the students, because who is the better judge for the teacher is what the students say. So in some way, in this quote that you have from the children, you can see that the support that the teacher gives to the student, it doesn't matter if it's a low or it's a high achievement, matters in terms of these schools are doing good in terms of education achievement, in terms of student achievement. So it shows us that the teacher matters. We need to improve this in terms, if we want to talk about policies or policy implication, it matters in terms of teacher training in service, and also teacher training at the initial teacher training at the university or pedagogical spaces. The other is that to keep an adequate climate, not to keep a climate where the teacher or the student feel that is care and the teacher support all the students. So for that reason, it's like this quote in some way, they show us that the role of the teacher and the role of the school principal matters in terms of try to keep an environment that promotes the student learning. So this is the most important resource in some way. And integration of all these results that I was talking before is at the school level. So we see that the school principal plays a role in terms of giving responsibility to the children in terms of norms on the things that they do within the school. Like they need to care about each other and also to respect their teachers and school principal. But also we see that the teachers, in terms of the work that they do at the school, and also in terms of how they feel with the different educational actors in terms of school climate, is important. And at the classroom level, we found that the work, the pedagogical practices in terms of the feedback that the teacher gives to the students is important. So several studies at primary level, they found this finding too. At secondary, is also a relevant factor a factor that is associated with good results in math and in reading. And the other result at the classroom level is all these practices also about the peer monitoring that are very important in terms of improving the student achievement. So to finalize my presentation before Rafael says something, what is first, we need to improve the school principal in service training. So what it means, we need to teach more the students in public schools. At least with this exercise that we did with this paper, is that the school leadership matters, and it's very important in terms of pedagogical practices that they could do within the school. The other is we need to secure the educational environment or try to keep a school climate that promotes the learning in the schools. And the third one is that we need to work more with these pedagogical practices related to how we give feedback to the students, because this one could be positive as it could be negative, because it depends also of the knowledge that the teacher has about the area that is giving or teaching to the students. So we have implications, and also we could talk about other implications that we have here. And to finalize, I would like to say thank you, or gracias in Spanish. And also I would like to point out that we have a paper that is available online. And also we have a policy brief that is in Spanish. So if someone wants to have more details about this study, they could go there. And I would like to say thank you to Rafael to not say something. I think so I keep on the time. I don't know. Okay, thank you.
Almost. Thanks very much, Juan. It was a super interesting presentation, and no, you ran just a bit late. No, it's a super interesting way of mixing quantitative and qualitative data, and I guess the paper is super well connected with the paper that Yyannu presented. So I think we can discuss about that later in the discussion. But yeah, your paper looked at a very key transition from schools to labor markets, and we know that generally in Latin America we perform quite badly in cognitive tests. So that's super interesting to know what is behind that. Thanks Juan for the presentation. So our last speaker is Zanuso. Claire is the head of the impact evaluation team and at the French Development Agency, AFD. Claire completed her PhD at Paris Dauphine University, specializing in development economics with a focus on natural disasters, coping strategies, and labor markets in Haiti. Her current research and project focus on labor market issues, youth aspirations, and impact evaluation of urban development interventions in developing countries. And I can say, I think she's working lately more in Africa. So Claire, thanks very much for joining us today, and you have 15 minutes.
Thank you very much for the invitation, Rafael. I'm very happy to be here with you, and today my intervention will be much more practitioner oriented than research oriented. So maybe because I guess some of you don't know about AFD, let me just present you in a nutshell what is evaluation at AFD. So AFD is the French Development Bank, basically. So it's around 3,000 people in more than 100 countries. But just to give you an idea, we are currently 24 evaluators and data analysts in the team, in the evaluation team. So just to give you an idea that we are not able to do all the research by ourselves. So we do a lot of partnership, research partnerships, and that's why maybe it's something who will complement the first presentations of this panel. So basically, we do two types of evaluation, project evaluation and broad scope evaluation. In the broad scope evaluations, we include the impact evaluation. But just to give you an idea of numbers, for the second types of evaluation, we do around 10 or 15 per year. So it's a very small part of our activity. What's interesting is that we do also some support to projects by analyzing existing data. And more and more in the last, let's say, 5 years, we use statistical data from national surveys, but also satellite images. And it won't be the point of my presentation today, but regarding satellite images, we have an initiative, MapMe, that it's open and is very useful in terms of matching this kind of data with longitudinal data. So just if you're interested on this, we can talk about that after. So here my presentation today will be about longitudinal data and impact evaluation of water infrastructure projects, AFD projects. Why AFD is interesting about this? Because the measure of the effectiveness of sustainable and long-term investments in drinking water networks in the last years was mainly oriented towards short-term projects like distribution of chlorine tablets, filter kits, and less regarding infrastructure, water infrastructure projects. So our commitment was to contribute to existing empirical evidence and complete it by focusing on let's say medium and long-term approaches. So for this, we have two ongoing impact evaluation, two ongoing in DRC, one in Uvira, South Kivu, and one in Kinshasa. What is interesting about these two examples is that we are not able to demonstrate the same thing with both impact evaluation. With the first one, and we are working with the London School of Hygiene and Tropical Medicine, this impact evaluation focused mainly on the impact on cholera and severe diarrheal disease. However, the second, the focus is more, and we will see that, on socioeconomic impacts. So for the one in Uvira, it's not, we have a part of it that is randomized, but it's much more a mixed methodology, but still with a rigorous identification strategy. So the interesting point in terms of data collection is that we merge administrative data on admission at the cholera treatment center to assess the impact of the project on cholera and other diseases. And we merge this administrative data with survey on household utilization of water, and also with post-flooding survey that we implemented in 2020. So the main component of this impact evaluation is based on the randomized rollout of the improved water supply network. And what is interesting in terms of results is that we were able to demonstrate that the impact on cholera incidents and behaviors change when drinking water sources are closer and run continuously, which would have been very difficult to assess with standard and non-longitudinal data. So the first results, because I don't have time to present it to you today, are already published in 3 academic journals. But the main result is that 23% of cholera cases in the city were caused by the interruption in water supply. So this means that there is a need for not only improve the quality of water, but also its sustainability, which in terms of policy recommendation with the SDGs is a very important result. In this impact evaluation, however, it was difficult to disentangle the place of water uses and how the households use the quality water and in which extent they still rely on less quality water. And for this, the second impact evaluation, it's very interesting, and that's the part where the longitudinal data was key to better understand the water uses. So on this second impact evaluation in Kinshasa, we have multiple rounds of data collection. The first one was in April-May 2018, and we collected data on around 3,000 households in 10 clusters. And at the same time, we did an exhaustive household enumeration in the project area, but also an exhaustive water points data collection in the project area. At the time, I was in the field work, and it was interesting to see all the challenges regarding this data collection of water points, but also how it was useful for other researchers and NGOs and institutions, and just for this impact evaluation, because you can merge with other socioeconomic data and longitudinal data, this survey of water ponds. So the second wave of data was just 1 year after, and because of the calendar of the intervention, we were still before the project and before COVID. So it's a follow-up survey before the intervention. So I was happy to, you had the explanation by Paul. Thank you, Paul. It's super useful to have 2 rounds of survey before the treatment to test the parallel trend hypothesis. So in practice, here you have an example where it's possible to do that. And the second point was about attrition, because having two rounds of data before the start of the project, you can measure your attrition and you can demonstrate that this attrition is not was existing before the treatment. So we can make the difference between to disentangle the attrition, like natural attrition, because people move from a place to another, and the attrition that is because you improve the living condition in an area. So maybe the poor people will move on another place, and you will have richer people that will move in. So and we can do that because, again, 1 year later, last year, we did another round of data collection. This time it was by phone because of COVID. And we can talk about all the challenges to collect data in terms of COVID and to have panel data in this period. So again, the attrition was higher. We have almost 20%. And so we review our strategy because with this significant attrition, we realized that it was not possible just to rely on our original panel households, and we decided, and you see that on this year, and the NLI data collection is ongoing. And so we have 2 samples this year, the panel, the classic household from our panel, but also a survey with the new residents in the project area. And then in addition, because we are very interested to understand the reason of this attrition and to know in which way it will affect the quality of our impact evaluation, we add an attributors survey. And finally, at the beginning, so in 2018 and this year, we had 2, and last year again, sorry, we had 3 administrative data recollection from 100 health facilities. So this is just an example of how it can be powerful to merge different kinds of data with the longitudinal data. So our strategy on this second impact evaluation is a simple difference methodology. So it's a quasi-experimental approach. And we did the identification of the control areas thanks to satellite images to be able to define the most similar control areas to treated zone. So the types of outcomes that we will have in this impact evaluation as the socioeconomic impacts, so wealth, female employment, and child schooling, which was not possible in Uvira in the previous impact evaluation because we did not have such extended longitudinal data. And on health impact, even if the one in Vira is much more rigorous in terms of assessing the impact of the water infrastructure project on cholera, this one is more precise regarding water uses and sanitation behavior. And this is just because of the kind of data and longitudinal data we collect. Just to finish, we have other two types of outcome, one on subjective well-being impacts, so perceived stress, violence, well-being, and again, to measure this kind of impact, we do need longitudinal data. And the final one is governance impact, which is super important in DRC context. So on this impact evaluation, we have a working paper online to present all the preliminary results of the first baseline, and we are working on, we will probably release a second working paper by summer on the second and third wave of data. So just to conclude, of course, we know that we have a lot to do and we want to do more and better, because today impact evaluation for an institution like AFD is quite demanding and tricky studies. But to stick on the positive thing, we do think that a key aspect for us is because it's require important human and financial investment at project and policy level. Matching longitudinal data with administrative data or geospatial data help to do more with the same budget. And also because the problem in this, like for development bank institution, people often say regarding impact evaluation that there is a limited operational learning. And by using longitudinal data, we can release more evidence, not only at the end, but all along the study. And it helps to improve the understanding of individual behavior and designing effective intervention of policies. And last point, in terms of accountability, because of the time of this kind of studies, it's not very useful. It's very useful for learning, but less for accountability, because it takes several years to give results. So the potential we see is to integrate multiple methods and different type of data to better assess the complex evaluations for our infrastructure project that we have a lot in our institution. Thank you. Rafael, over to you.
Thanks very much, Claire. Yeah, no, that has been a super interesting presentation as well, and in a completely different setting. I know how difficult it is to collect data in Africa in general, and from the development from a development bank point of view, I think like it's really interesting to mix these different data sets and try to take the best of each of them. So thanks for the presentation. We are going to go to the Q&A session. We are running a bit late. So for those who have to leave, please be sure that we are going to try to get back to you. You can, we will try to send your questions to the right person, the right speaker, and if you have any additional question, you can send them to the same email that you use for registration. I think it's going to be Deborah from Young Life, who is going to be redirecting the questions to the speaker. And so we have some time for Q&A. I'm going to try to merge some of the questions. So first one is for Paul. and it's a question from Kat Porter, and she's asking mainly what are your thoughts on embedding RCTs within existing longitudinal studies? Which are the benefits of having, for example, many rounds of pre-intervention data versus contamination of the observational study?
Yeah, that's a tough question. And it's come up in the context of the Young Lives, where they've been following these kids for 18 years now or something. So yeah, it's really fantastic sort of pre-programmed data, and you could use it to, if we took for example, the younger cohort, there's 2,000 kids in each country. And the problem is that, okay, if we treat some of those kids randomly assignment treatment, then if the treatment has an effect, then they're not really going to be representative of the population anymore. And it's sort of, I guess that's what you could call contamination of the longitudinal study. And I don't really know off the top of my head of any attempts to do this with, there's longitudinal studies in Indonesia and in other places. My recommendation, I guess, would be that if you were going to try to do this, probably put most of the sample into the control group so they would not be contaminated. Like instead of having a 50-50 split between treatment and control, maybe do 75% control and 25% treatment. So if you do sort of contaminate, you're only going to contaminate 1/4 of the sample rather than 1/2. But it hasn't really been tried, so it would be interesting to try it. But there's you're taking a risk in contamination. But yeah, and I guess the other thing is that I guess with the Young Lives, as the people get older, they're not children anymore, and so maybe the risk of contamination as they become adults might be smaller because they're just they're getting older. And also in some of these studies, and I don't know really what's happening with the budgets in the UK the last few weeks, but they're cutting back, and so maybe the panel data is just not going to be able to go forward for any more rounds, and then go ahead, try it and see what happens. And you'll have to come up with your own money to follow up, because if the longitudinal study is out of money, then you can do it. But I wouldn't worry too much about contamination. Actually, most of the interventions don't really have a big effect, so there's probably not going to be a big contamination. That's my quick answer to that question.
Thanks very much. And there are some questions for Yyannu and Juan. So first, I'm gonna go for one for Yyannu, and I think what is your measure of what a good teacher is, and how related being a good teacher is to the training that teachers had in the past? So it's something that it could be improvable with public policies, for instance, or not?
Okay. What is a measurement is basically the outcomes of the teacher. I mean, some teachers, it's the outcomes of the students. So it's achievement. It's achievement on math, language, and executive function, the three of them. And what we found is that the best of the two, so you have two teachers, right? At least in one school, you have two teachers. So the teacher that does better than the other teacher usually does better in every single outcome. So that's, and it's for everybody who's working on education, that's value added, basically. And the second question you were asking me if it's, I didn't quite get it. If this can be improved with pause, if it's a pause implication.
No, if being a good teacher is related with the teacher's training, so the previous background of them, or is just something that reveals during in their relationship with the students in the classroom.
So we found we have a lot of different variables that are administrative and also that we measure directly from the teachers. And what we found is that there's definitely a component of having more than 3 years of experience. So if the teacher is less than 3 3 years or less experience on average does worse than teachers with more experience. But adding more and more years above 3, we couldn't find anything. So it's just, it becomes flat. So it's not only about experience, it's about other things, about the interactions, it's about a bunch of other things. We couldn't find anything, for example, on personality. We couldn't find anything on socioeconomic status of the teachers. Most of our teachers are women, though, because these are younger children. But you could also have a little bit, now that they're older, you could have a little bit of looking at male teachers with respect to female teachers. But that's it, 3 years, and after that, you're no more than that.
Thanks, Yyannu. So I'm just gonna do a quick stop here for the Q&A, just for people who have to leave. Tomorrow we have the last session of the workshop, and it's gonna be led by Gina Crivello from Young Life, and it's going to be about doing and adapting longitudinal research and what have we learned. So it's going to be a super interesting session. We will have Joe Boyden from Young Life, Rebecca Hardy from Closer, Caroline Moreau from Johns Hopkins, Regina Morrow, again from Young Life, Sabina Faith from Brack University, and Alan Sanchez from Glewee. So we hope that you can join us tomorrow as well at the same time. And for those who have to leave, please be sure that we will try to get back with your questions and answers. And thanks very much for joining. If you can stay, speakers, like some extra minutes for answering a couple of more questions, that would be great. And so sorry for the interruption, Juan. A related question to the one I asked to Yyannu is a question of Elizabeth Rosales. So she's basically her question is about what about the interaction between teachers and the principals in the two schools? What were the good practices in those interactions?
Yes, no, I saw that question on the QA. When I did the presentation, like when I showed the results about the qualitative study, I didn't point out the bottom part, not the part at the beginning where it shows in some way what are the practices that the school principal does with the teachers. Mainly first is the monitoring, the pedagogical monitoring that they do with the teachers. Is like the school principals, at least they take part of his or her time to go to the classroom at least 3 times during the year, see the class of the teacher, observe what are the flows that they have, and then after the class they talk and they share some ideas about what is necessary to improve in terms of how is teaching to the students and how is developing the topic in the class. The other part that is helping in some way in this of good practices, if we could say, that they are doing in these effective schools, is that the school principal, they give a space for professional development of the teachers. It's like they make some or they take part of the time to generate a collegiate climate. It's like the teachers, they could share their ideas, they could talk to each other. In some way, this is a similar result that they found in Chile with Belay, but at the primary level, that the teachers from the same grade, they shared each other about like different strategies to try to teach to the students. In this effective school, we found that the teachers, they share the practices that they are doing in their classroom and trying to inform to each other, and also trying to like make groups and all of that to try to improve the teaching practices. So it's a school principal that promotes these spaces within the schools that help to have the better results. So in terms of public policy that we could do, in some way, if we are seeing that these practices are helping, for example, in Peru, we have a program that is that they give this pedagogical monitoring to the teachers, and it has two maybe impact evaluation that it shows that this kind of monitoring that go to the class, see the class, after the class, try to talk with the teachers and point out what they need to improve the class, help to the students to improve the achievement. So these practices are very good to improve the student learning.
Super, thanks Juan. I have a question for Claire, but Yyannu also please feel free to jump in. So from your point of view, from a donor point of view, so from an international development bank point of view, so either the AFD or the IDB. So what is your view on the future of longitudinal studies? So what sort of advantage do you see on running a longitudinal study for informing the design and implementation of social policies? Clay, I don't know if you want to take it.
Yeah, no, feel free to complete. Huh? From IFG point of view, I mean, the interesting part is investing right now in longitudinal data help us to use them for future policy that we will support or major intervention to better target our beneficiaries, but also hopefully to have intervention and policy that will be with a higher rates of evaluability. Because the limited, I mean, our main challenge today is to be able to assess the impact of our intervention or the public policy we support. And the main problem usually is the lack of data and the lack of longitudinal data. So for a donor point of view, even if it's costly to invest on longitudinal data, our key role on research and evaluation department is to demonstrate that it's less costly to invest as soon as possible in it, and not in each project or at the end to evaluate something, because it will be even more costly and we will have more bias. So the more we have ex ante data and longitudinal data, the more we will do quality evaluation. Yyannu?
Yes, I mean, basically the same. It's much more robust to have an idea of interventions and looking at a population that you have been following pretty much for as long as you want to look at them. And what Professor Glewee was saying is, yes, I mean, sometimes it's not good to intervene in part of the panel, but sometimes you use part of the panel and you take away the rest of the panel. You look what happened with the rest of the panel without the intervention. So it's for the Inter-American Development Bank has always been very important. The project that I presented right now is one of three really main longitudinal studies. This is the longest one. We have another one also in Ecuador with children that started, I believe, 2 years old. And now they're, I think, 15, 16. And there's a smaller sample. And then we have another one with the University of West Indies in Jamaica. And that's an amazing panel. I don't know if, because it just starts measuring children in utero. So basically it has a lot of information on the mothers, the fathers, a lot of biometrics, so there's a lot of, and now you can measure cognitive skills. And yes, it's correlation. Sometimes it's just basic correlation, but it's a correlation that is very interesting and that you're not gonna get from anything else if you don't follow the same population. So it's an investment.
And if I may add something, I mean, we are investing a lot on satellite images, but and impact and geospatial impact evaluation, but those techniques are interesting, but very limited if we don't have data from the ground. And it's very powerful when we can merge this kind of satellite images data with socioeconomic longitudinal data. And most of the time, I mean, we don't have many countries where we have both.
Absolutely. Well, thanks very much. I don't want to take more of your time. Thanks again to all the speakers. Thanks for the presentations. We have a good mix of different views and from a general point of view, longitudinal and RCTs, applied research, mixed methods, and in education and infrastructure. So it has been a super interesting discussion. Thanks for your time and thanks for all people attending the seminar. Thanks very much. Have a good day.
You're welcome.
Gracias.
everyone.
Cuídense.
Bye. Gracias. Bye-bye.